На самом деле, вот если говорить все-таки о человеке, да, человек в центре социальной политики, понимаете, у нас...
A human individual is in the center of social policies, and I think it is wrong to reduce social policies to economic benefits. What Russia is going through is an identity crisis, and for many years, working with the government, working with Mr. Putin when he was prime minister. I worked with 6 prime ministers of Russia. I was the head of the Department for Social Policies of the government of Russia. But about 15 years ago, I certainly had a firm belief that developed in me is that the problem is not so much about figures and numbers, but about the mindset. But whereas previously this was about some kitchen talk or even small talk, I remember the book of the Spanish author's book. Is that the most important thing to an intellectual is to be against. So when I was telling them that this is not just about economics and not just about pensions and salaries, I was mostly waved down. Economy is doing great, people are doing great, so there is no identity crisis. But indeed, the oil-rich years from the social and economic standpoint, these were generally prosperous years, but these very years saw the great financial inequality, and the social lifts were stopped. Now, when people speak about the March the 26th, and people talk about this even at the presidential administration, what happened, the young people going to the streets, but the roots are very evident. When the social lifts have been stopped, and there is the new nomenclatura or the new apparatchiks, which has evolved in Russia over the past several years. I do remember the old Soviet nomenclatura. I remember that the social mobility was literally stopped, and what we're seeing that the sons and daughters of these top of this Russian nomenclatura in the business structures. The son of Mr. Ivanov is the head of Alros, the son of Mr. Patrushev, and I can quote many other examples. This is some sort of a tendency, including a tendency or a well-noted trend in the regions. And there are many people young people in Russia who understand that the social vistas for them are all but blocked. And that's when young people, when a 20-year-old thinks as to what would happen to me in 10 years, how shall I develop, how will I subsist, this is, of course, a major social ill.
Whatever is going on right now, there's 5-storied houses that would be renovated in Moscow, something that was never expected by anybody. I didn't expect that because I realized quite a while ago, because somewhere things like this would happen, where you can never make a guess, and what it ends in, it's impossible to make a guess either. But okay. Our mayor in Moscow, Mr. Sobyanin, decided that he, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, that he will erase, he will pull down old houses, like 5-storied, and it immediately affects 1.5 million of Muscovites, and he decided he would do it virtually overnight. And this has been announced without a law even being adopted, the decision that I think is highly, as a person who has used to work for the bureaucracy, I know what it means to prepare the documents. They're completely unprepared. Absolutely no calculations have been made, and announcements were made, and they will now start to tear down. People are personally affected. You see what I mean? Those people who in sociological surveys say they are supporting Putin, those famous 86 or whatever percent, which I actually tended to disbelieve. It turned out, like in a story, that when they were arresting communists, in Germany, we were silent. When they would arrest priests, we would be silent. When they would arrest Jews, we would be silent. And then they came to arrest us. So one should have spoken about this. One should have discussed it. And again, this very same people, it turned out that people en masse are reluctant because they take away these dwellings, although they're small and dilapidated. It's still, nobody has explained where they would go. So this is like, I would put it this way, huge social pending situation. I keep a close eye on this, which also makes you think. Makes you think about what? What's the point of all this for the country, for Russia in this case? Nobody knows, you know? Again, we attempted when Medvedev's presidency, my colleague and I, at his request, we had this INSOR, a special institute, which he requested to set up, where we tried to give an answer. We prepared a document known The Shape of Things to Come That We Desire, which was totally abandoned. And again, they're speaking about the shape of things to come, all of a sudden. And then we adopted this mem into people's minds, and we tried to show that what is the future for us, European. It's clear that we have European. There's nothing to reinvent the wheel. I actually was just absolutely shocked. It was somewhere in presidential address. Was it back in 2012 or 11? Yes, 2011, when he again became president, Putin. He said that Russia is a state-civilization. Few people paid attention to that. It was back in 2012. I shuddered. I shuddered because this combination state-civilization, these are worst ideas about our history and about ourselves. Because civilization, as I see, to non-civilization, borderline comes along very simple criterion. This is relations between the state and the man. If the state is the owner here, and if you're just somebody to serve this state, you're like personnel, support staff. So then it has nothing to do with the situation in no way. It's all about slavery. It may be known by different names. It's clear, from moderate forms to totalitarian forms, and Stalinist Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. There are softer forms, right? And in history we still remember those debates that still go on, what kind of history we have. And I'm the member of the Committee of Civic Initiative. I'm actually managing Kudrin's foundation that is supporting all this. Kudrin's foundation for support of civic initiatives. We've been friends with Alexei Kudrin, and we prepared, rather not myself, but my colleagues, who historians recently presented and published, is what past is needed for Russia's future. Do you see what I mean? If our past is all about the history of the Russian state, as Karamzin put it, it's not the history of a nation, not the history of people who have lived in this country. This is one story. Then this is what the state wants to do. Then the state has been using us. Like they gave you like dwelling. You started to privatize it in the early 1990s.
Образом, просто вот в 5
Now, in the very same way, virtually overnight, it's taking it back from people never asking what they think about this. They can send it on some military adventures like in Syria. Who ever asked anybody? We perfectly know that all, even Russian laws, were violated in sending our military to abroad, including Syria. Lena Lukyanova, I think, is the school's expert. She's a very good lawyer. She did a special analysis, and that has been published, that they violated even our own Russian rules. Because somebody took a decision, and we know who took this decision, get there, and the Russian soldiers are dying now. Very much like the case of Ukraine. Very much the situation like that. We are all going in behind the state, like. It is not about civilization. Civilization is that where the state is not even an institution. It's about servitude. It's some kind of entity that services the society. There are many details, many differences. It's not an ideal situation. There's no such thing as ideal. Even Sweden is not ideal, and other European countries, but nevertheless, there is a model you should aspire to reach, and many things hence follow. This model is based upon certain values, which for some reason in Russia, when you speak to somebody, they wave you at you and say, well, what are you speaking about? Values, well, they're clear. They're values of supremacy of individual over the state, quite obviously. In this sense of the word, what follows is the concept of human rights in many ways. In the broad sense of the word, be it political and social rights, hence what follows is democracy. We now perfectly realize that the European civilization is also undergoing very challenging times. We see very many crises and challenges. But I suppose since this is a civilization based around discussion and dialogue and democracy, it will survive. It will surely overcome it, whereas we won't, because we don't have anything like this that is not in place. So when we had these third economic years, I was saying, guys, let's think about at least some important things. Because Russia has never, mind you, had any, at least supported, it's something supported by part of the society. I would put it this way, the most advanced, the most educated, no doctrine, no strategy. What do we want from ourselves? We recently somehow debated this, and we had an interesting episode. I wrote an article without giving names, but they were pretty curious. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the former Baltic republics, they immediately realized where they need to go. They went back to Europe with great losses, social way. I kept a close look at this. It was quite a painful transformation in terms of revenue, in terms of expenses to be paid for utilities and whatever, but people would still have some goal they need to pursue. They decided they would go back from where they originated. That's all clear. We can see most republics, say, in the Central Asia, where did they go back to? They went back to the times of Khan, of Emirates, and in fact, they are empire, Russian Empire, that existed before 1917. Many people forgot about this. They were Kokand Kingdom, where there were emirs, very much like today's Chechnya, inside Russia, who lived under their own rules that were something absolutely wild that seemed in St. Petersburg or in Moscow. And they were, not all of them, but the Central Asian republics, for example, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, to a certain sense of the word, they went back to this because it's something quite habitual to them. But where is Russia turning back to? It's a good question. Where is Russia heading for? The Soviet Union, or is it the Tsarist Empire? None of these ideas seem to appeal. It doesn't seem to work. Although some sort of hot-minded people want to merge it all together, saying let's borrow something from the Russian Empire, let's do something like orthodoxy, popularism, and orthodoxy. We can see certain elements of, yes, autocracy. Yes, we do see them. We're trying to adopt certain system of what was known like in the slogan, like popular support and orthodoxy, yes, folk character. You can see how this happens. And since the secular nature of our state is being destroyed, well, there are attempts to, it's like kind of horrible eclectic composition to get back these, something from the Soviet Union, these votes we see at the election. For example, today's Duma, it's an absolute clone of the Soviet type of voting. When just one party, it just took a monopoly position. I'm not discussing whether it was honest or dishonest election, but the very turnout, the very result. We have something that looks very much like in the former GDR. I don't know why GDR, because he worked there, he saw the country, and in this sense he wants to bring together, to merge Russia with Europe. GDR for him is like optimum correlation. German character, there's hard-working, being very neat on the one hand, but on the other hand they're manageable. They also had a multi-party system. For that matter, they had a national front. When they keep saying about the All-Russian Popular Front, National Front, yes, Popular Front, this is the name when it's known. People's Front, I've never dealt with it and I hope never will. This is just a calque, something to mimic the National Front in GDR, which comprised all the parties, and when the election, they would decide this party will get the most here or there, and Socialist United Party of Germany, I forgot the name which was known by. So we have like relics of the Soviet times. It comes as no surprise that communists, of course we have the Communist Party, and we have Mr. Zyuganov there who just crossing himself and praying in church. This is something that shocks me altogether. It's some kind of, it's like an oxymoron, absolutely things that don't go together. One of multiple manifestations of this sort of mix-up, what is known like compote, or like stewed fruit. And yes, we have some elements. I'm moving over to economy. Yes, in the early 1990s, we had reform. I took part in them in the social bloc of the government. There were radical reforms, economic reforms. And it's been many years. Regrettably, there was no other option available at that time. And I repeat, probably there was no other option was possible. But at that time, from my view, they committed a huge mistake. My colleagues with whom I used to work, they gave away the political questions to be reviewed by Boris Nikolaevich, the then president, and the elite around him. We're saying, we look into economy. This is what Gegor Gaidar was saying. We do economy, and it will rule out, so to decide. And we will this way or other reach democracy. It never worked this way. And Yegor and others, other colleagues of mine who did it, Gaidar is no longer with us. And those who are still around and work, they recognize that they missed this, and that the political factor, the reason for economic crisis, stopped short all the reforms that we have. Going back to today's situation, what I want to say now, so everybody realizes that without political transformation, no reform will turn out to be a success. If somebody keeps claiming that, let's look into economy and somebody else will take care of politics, this is either people are non-professional, which we've had more than enough, Or people are dishonest. People are afraid to speak up, especially those who are taking some posts, because it's become a swear word, because policy has been monopolized by powers that be. I keep saying, let's understand what politics is about. For example, judicial reform. Well, colleague Barshin spoke here. Judicial reform, what is it about? It's sheer, pure politics. Because when we say politics, we recently think that there are some things like Navalny. Navalny is about politics. Those who support it, it's bad, so on. But this is so primitive, and I suppose so just like kindergarten outlook. Or, for example, a question about the fate of our state-owned corporations in Russia, be they Gazprom or Rosneft, Russian railways, you mean it. It's a matter of principle. It's truly a matter of principle. Very much fundamental as the judicial reform. And if we don't do anything about this, then the role of the state in economy, then the state is monopolist. That's why things are dying, because of this monopoly. Not only in economy. But if you don't change anything, nothing else matters. We can say very nice words about macroeconomic indicators, about development of new technologies, and you name it. Those who want to read my article in the Vedomosti about enhanced role of technocracy, and again, the shape of things to come. This is a new word that we launched under Medvedev, and now there's somehow this image, the shape of things to come, is something that's beginning to intimidate me, all this talk, because it all boils down either, as I wrote in my article, to like Jules Verne picks all kinds of like submarines, dirigibles, electricity, but not a word is mentioned about man. What happens to humans under these circumstances? Or there's another, opposite point of view, where they speak about, like the Kubansky Kazaki film, like in 2000 and something. I'll say a couple of words about the strategies which we have right now at this time. That's back in 1935, for argument's sake. Now they say it was back in 1930, 2030. Things will turn out fine. People will live in like blissed cities where they'll have unmanned transport around, where they have all in greenery. People will live in peace, and you name it. We will live no worse than somewhere here in Europe. Well, whatever. But my question is, okay, guys, but please go down to earth.
Вот вы сейчас, вот посмотрите на...
Look down at the country we are living at. We haven't made our most fundamental choice. That is the choice of values. Then, yes, probably these dreams may have a chance to come true. But given the political system that I've been discussing, that does not boil down, although it's also important, non-replaceability of government, absence of political competition. It's one of few factors, but they're quite severe. Again, economy, which has been privatized by exactly those people who are the state. Do realize that our economy is just a huge corporation, that's it, which is pumping out the money out of our natural resources, out of subsoils, from us through all these taxes and these payments that are adopted. And this is quite a successful corporation. It makes a lot of profit, and you name it. Well, how does this corporation state, this economy, privatized by the state, which is paradoxical, how can you combine it all with these beautiful dreams of something like 2030, 2035, when things would turn out fine, as these dreamers say? This is seeking to distract people from, as Valentina Ivanovna Matvienko says, to this word she likes, like завести рака за камень. It means to disorient people and mislead them. So in these 25 years of Russia's independence, of the new Russia, one serious attempt has been made to make this choice, not only at the level of... no, people understand perfectly fine, trust me. though they are minority, but it depends on which choice people have made. And at the level of society and political forces stand behind it, nothing has been made. The situation has reached a critical stage, even for today's ruling elite. This ruling elite, I suppose they're made up of at least 20 people, 20. Hardly more people. They are people who are taking the decisions, and we see they're implemented here for very pragmatic reasons. And after that, our state did not have enough to meet its own needs. What are the needs? First of all, to become rich, corruption, something that quite obvious, systemic. And with all these vineyards, if you're a top manager of the corporation, then why is it Igor Ivanovich Sechin? Why is it that Igor Ivanovich shouldn't have a yacht? Of course he should. It goes without saying. It's automatic. Very much like people who embody our state. How can they live in a regular flat and not have 125 residencies? They just stopped having enough money to they don't have enough money to support it. The economy finally, which has long been said, has gone down, and nothing in the coming 5 to 10 years, even if they start reform, which is hardly possible, it will not turn out right. Okay, but all this talk about 1.5% GDP, 2% GDP growth, right? Trust me, I'm an economist, and I talk to our biggest macroeconomists. This is just a matter of mathematics, arithmetic. Okay, tomorrow we launch another aircraft carrier, but it will mean 1% growth. But it's just statistical tricks, which, of course, a lot of people that have to report to Putin, like we have instead of negative growth, we have a minor plus, or you name it. And everybody perfectly realizes that, like Sasha Ozan said, a well-known economist, dean of the School of Economics, he said the heart of our economics stopped beating. Yes, there are some, but the heart. But if there is no investment, then what does it mean? It means that investors, in our Russia's private investors and foreign investors, they don't want to invest. They distrust. This word is actually, which is now used like lack of trust between the state and business, the state and society. Trust, as we perfectly realize, is again matter based upon value. It can't be measured by some percentage of GDP, but it's quite tangible, because people don't understand, even Russia's businesses, what would happen, say, in a year? What would happen tomorrow? Okay, we are all of us here. Maybe tomorrow Putin will announce that we'll have, I don't know, changes in the government or whatever, or we'll have another fantastic adventure for the country. And under those conditions, if it's privately owned economy, how can you invest in this economy? Because it's changing. What sort of trust are you speaking? Very much like our population is disoriented. On the one hand, I just read, it's hard to trust Zoom. The number of happy people is record high, as they claim, compared to all the times from the early 1990s. People claim they're happy. Well, this is the way they say. So, again, I would put it this way. They now understand, it's clear that Zoom data for them are no longer relevant. It's just for consumption for us. It's part of propaganda. This is part trying to make people come, make people, again, come to peace. Because people from these 5-storied houses are just going on the verge of demonstrating. Look, but you're happy. Don't do that. Don't do that. they will decide it for you. But the share of, which is important for this elite, the share of Russian economy is declining in Russian economy. This is what they understand. First of all, as I was saying, less money that you can sort of dispose of for your personal purposes or for whatever, and less money so that we should threaten the world, saying how horrible we are. And you should really take us into consideration because we can, we've got missiles and you name it. And it all ends on that. Actually, if this year, now military expenses, this is official data, in the budget, less than last year, although the situation is difficult, there are many things like, well, even this is not enough even to pay for this. And thoughts come by that something has to be changed, but without changing, that's a problem. And this is a strategy they like to discuss. It is quite a somewhat funny situation, to be honest, for me. But in point of fact, it's very serious. Because some groups try to draft strategies never covering political questions. For example, Titov, Boris Titov, the strategy of growth, which was published in January. It's a matter of sheer economics. There are some matters about court reform, but, very careful. Just print out the money, give it to economy, and then our business will run out to invest this money into our production, and the production will flourish. And not just 1% of GDP will get 4% GDP. Well, listen, it's not discussed even seriously. Even Putin realizes that. In his economic views, he's a liberal, if you can put it this way. I would put it this way, he's a monetarist. He understands politically. And inflation is bad. You can't... I don't know why Titov with his colleagues decided they were right about it. In my view, there's absence of political intuition. And this question about strategy by Kudrin, which everybody is looking forward to see, I'd like to say that there will be no such thing. There will be no such thing as a public document to be published in May, so that the Center for Strategic Things has come up with this. And although I do have something to do with this, yes, indeed, there are some discussions, there are certain texts, and which can somehow, maybe some sphere, indeed, there is a big segment on the judiciary reform. Kudrin publicly speaks about state corporations. He spoke about the political competition. He says that we should somehow build our relations with the world. Our confrontation with the West is unacceptable, and under these conditions are impossible, which I think is right. But the most important thing is not said, these values things, which certainly give rise to allergy to this ruling elite, which I was saying that this is then replicated in our propaganda, in that Europe, in the broad sense of the word, not geographically only, that is living to see its last days. We know that the decline of Europe was forecast many times for the last 100 years, and from that to time it never happens, luckily. But that is no example for us that we have like something like traditional values, and nobody has ever discussed them with me. I'll seek to find...
Where are the traditional values of Russia? It appears that they coincide in all material aspects with the European values, and indeed the traditional elites of all religions and conventions, including, of course, Christianity and Islam. Why are we not and should not expect any strategy by Mr. Kudrin. Any materials which are being prepared there by the Center of Strategic Reforms are missing a core. They do not have much to couple between the different parts and to have some sort of synergy. So when and if these materials are taken to Mr. Putin, he would make a choice. And Mr. Kudrin has already said that they would not publish anything without the president's approval. Well, this is his choice. This is a classical technological politics, because Mr. Kudrin is, of course, a politician, as many call him an expert. He is certainly a politician. He participates in all of these games. We do not know how he views himself, but however, this is classical politics. So. We may be seeing something in autumn when the presidential campaign starts. I would say there's an almost 100% probability that Mr. Putin will run for office again. However, there's probably 90% probability that he will be coming up with some plans. I do not expect much because by his type he is a person of very strong attitudes and system of views, and I do not readily believe that he's in any way ready to change his views. Well, however, it will be interesting to observe. But I generally have a pessimistic outlook in the following sense. It appears that we shall go through a lengthy period of slow degradation, something that the Russian society is already going through. I do not much believe that this can be reverted by mass protests or revolutionary changes, because the political system has mostly been structured and the mass protests, including, say, the truck drivers or, say, the residents of the 5-story buildings in Moscow, I think the government will settle these local crises and will not allow those to spill over into the nationwide protests. So I think this slow degrading will be going on for many years, and there may be some conflicts within the elites. But the history of Russia over the past hundreds of years was mostly based or indeed had a great importance in the inter-elite strife. The events of 1917 are being viewed today, and I'm reading a lot about these events. It appears that these were primarily the inter-elite conflicts, which then led to civil war with millions killed, but it started from the top in August of 1991. We also are seeing a classical within-elite conflict, and the same what we're seeing today. So this will mostly be out of the system strife, which we do hope will not affect our daily lives. But in terms of strategies, the word itself, the word of strategy, is gradually being discredited. I have heard that Mr. Kiriyenko received several persons from Mr. Shutov, the dean of the political science department of the Moscow State University. This is and so they were meeting Mr. Kiriyenko to develop a 2030 strategy. Well, and it appears that there is an idea about the 2035 strategy at the Kudrin Center. But what is 2035 for us today? In the conditions of Russia, which is hardly possible to predict even an annual prognosis. And by the way, if you read any of the strategies published over the past decades, one would see that this is quite a bit of a European future. So while everybody likes to be talking about the unique path of Russia, all strategies eventually lead to some sort of a European scenario for the country's development, which is an interesting controversy in the political discourse. So the transitory period has been now taking place for 25 years, and it never stops. This is the transit from what we had in the Soviet times to some place which we have to find ourselves. But this is not some sort of a national idea. No ideology, as the Constitution says, can be dominating, and the country must be free of ideological domination. But the elites, of course, compose the agendas, including the agenda as they see for the society. But when the elite finds itself in the position of an impasse or a deadlock, then this is quite a difficult situation. So we'll see. We'll live and see. But both me and my colleagues, we're trying to propose some alternatives, but clearly we're limited in our powers. Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll have more windows of opportunity to open, but there is an important scientific interest that I have in these, and while I'm in a way involved in politics, but at the same time I am an observer, and maybe one day one can write a book about this. Thank you.